Okay, so I have had far too many questions for a channel that just barely covers Linux, to questions about covering gaming on Linux, how to best run games that I've personally never even heard of running on Linux, and a software package called DXVK, which a lot of people were showing me running Overwatch on Linux at basically full performance on a lot of computers. And this had me interested, and my original plan was on my gaming rig to install a separate SSD for Linux and get that going, and that hasn't happened yet. But what has happened was Steam actually seems to be integrating this, or something along those lines. So instead of fumbling through all of the words myself, I've recruited the help of closer to an expert on this subject, Wendell from Level1Techs, whose name I do know how to say. I realize I said it poorly in another video, and that was just because I don't say things right in videos. I do know that it's Wendell. I know.
It's okay. I can't pronounce things either.
TubeBuddy is the best tool you can get to manage your YouTube channel. You can update videos in bulk, optimize your SEO, syndicate to social media, back up your metadata, and more, all with a simple browser extension. Head to EposVox.com/TubeBuddy to learn more and download it for free.
So
it's exciting.
It's
an exciting time for gaming.
Yeah. What do we have going on here?
So Steam has a compatibility tool built into it now called Proton. And it's kind of like, all of the compatibility tools that we have on Linux kind of sort of all wrapped up in one. And so Valve, it turns out, as part of their Linux strategy, has been surreptitiously, I would say, participating in the community to try to get some of these compatibility layers a little bit further along for a little bit better compatibility. You know, they've offered the carrot, I think, of Steam on Linux and the Linux gaming platform that a lot of indie developers have super taken advantage of. But I think a lot of AAA developers sort of remain, let's say, uninterested in the platform. And it's really like, as a gamer, the gaming perspective on Linux the last couple of years is a completely different perspective than the graphics platform of Linux for the last couple of years from the perspective of a developer. So like on the developer side of things, we've gone from a less than optical, sort of old graybeard setup that was sort of a holdover from, old school networked mainframe systems to more and more modern graphics stacks. We have a usable open source video driver for modern AAA hardware from AMD, the AMD GPU drivers. Oh, those guys are trying. I mean, even Linus Torvalds even recognizes they're trying because they've submitted some patches that are, let's say, rough around the edges, but it's like, oh, they're trying. And so I feel like Linus Torvalds is giving them a little bit of a pass, but also encouragement. So it's like, learn. This is how we do, open source. It's not like things in the commercial world where you can band-aid stuff together. Things have to be like really super awesome. So finally, the graphics system in Linux is coming up to parity with what gamers sort of expect on Windows. Although there is still a little bit of a performance penalty. It's been really interesting the last couple of years because AMD and NVIDIA are kind of leapfrogging one another. NVIDIA still has the closed source binary driver, but when AMD GPU sort of became like usable with games like when BioShock Infinite was initially released on Linux, the AMD GPU driver performance was amazing. It was mind-blowing how good it was. Still not at parity with Windows, but it was just awesome. And then all of a sudden, almost overnight, the NVIDIA binary driver was just a little bit better. And the recent NVIDIA update from just a couple of weeks ago, things have gotten just a little bit better again. And so it's like, I think some people are watching and sort of playing here. There are NVIDIA developers that are participating in the DXVK stuff. There was a 2-year-old bug that drove me insane with the NVIDIA driver, and they fixed it because of people using DXVK. And so, kudos to the NVIDIA developers for, fixing those bugs, which is, somebody's got to work on it. And so I don't know if that's an off-label project for NVIDIA or if there's something going on behind the scenes with deeper involvement. I'm not really sure, but I know that NVIDIA has sold a lot of graphics cards to Linux users, not for gaming, but for machine learning.
Right.
Yeah, well, there have been a couple of instances where the performance on, like Phoronix reported that BioShock Infinite, like during this whole leapfrogging thing, Phoronix reported better performance on BioShock Infinite on Linux versus Windows, and I was able to replicate that. But I was only able to replicate that because I figured out, I think, what it was. I can't say for sure, but when I ran the automated test suite with BioShock Infinite, the DirectX 11 DOF preset was not working correctly on the Windows side. It thought it was the DOF, but it was not.
Right.
And so it should have been straight up DX11 to whatever in the Linux native version, and then the graph sort of evened out, and I was like, oh, that's disappointing.
Glimmer of hope. So Valve has rolled out a beta build of the client that implements a lot more of these Proton features. Basically a compatibility layer to natively launch Windows-only games previously. It's framed as being something very easy, and I'm wondering how easy that is. And they have an interesting list of games that I think kind of encapsulates the impression of gaming on Linux in the first place, because you have really, really new games like Doom 2016, the VR version of Doom, which actually was very surprising to me. Nier Automata, no one knows how to say that word. I don't either. That one, Nier. And then Tekken 7, which came out like this year. But then you have Ultimate Doom, Doom 2 from the original Doom 2, and a bunch of just like scattered older games. And so you have this like very small list. I mean, it's a good list, and like I said, there are impressive games, but it's a fairly small list. It's not like suddenly they were just like, here's an entire back catalog we've already tested in advance, kind of like with the Xbox One backwards compatibility thing, where they were like launching with everything they could at first. You have very scattered in the decades of which games are out.
That may not be enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that if you're, a hardcore Windows user and you're open source curious or Linux curious, and you dive, head first, I think that what you experience I could understand how somebody might have a negative experience and have the whole thing sort of leave a sour taste in their mouth. And so I really do worry about that, because Valve has a history of sort of sending things out sort of half-cocked. And
right.
So some have accused them of doing that with, Steam OS. But again, from there are some valid points to that criticism. Steam OS was like really amazing, and it seemed like all these AAA studios were going to support Linux, and then it just kind of petered out. And is Steam OS still a thing? And if you try to install Steam OS now, it's sort of kind of unsupported in the version of Debian that it's based on, and hasn't been updated. And there's Upstate, like the ups. That's very small. That's like, it doesn't really understand how it is. Like a lot of that doesn't really understand how it is in the open source world. So we don't need Steam OS anymore, because Ubuntu is at a point where it'll do everything that Steam OS did.
Right.
And a lot of other distros can run it as well. So I've tried this Steam thing on about 6 different machines, and about 4 of them have been fine. 2 of them have been less than fine. And the 2 that have been less than fine were more of the fringe distros.
Right.
2 of the machines were Ubuntu 16.04 and 18.04. Those were basically okay. And then 2 of the other distros were not. It was not as seamless of an experience as Ubuntu was, but it still wasn't a terrible experience.
Right.
And so I think if you're Linux curious, you can do this, and not, it can be really frustrating if you're a proficient computer user and then you start using something else, and then it's like, I have no idea what's going on. And so we have a lot of resources to help you with that, but understand that that's sort of a transition. It's like, you're gonna learn some new skills. You're gonna do some new stuff. You're gonna learn how stuff works under the hood. You're gonna learn a little bit about the magic of how your computer works, but it's not appliance and or console like. Somebody could build a console someday that will give you the console experience if this works really well. More so than Windows, I think.
Just not Valve in 2010.
Not Valve. Not Valve in 2010, not Valve in 2018.
And not Ouya or Atari, but...
And there's still a lot of work to do on the graphics subsystem. I mean, the patches that are coming in hot and fast from AMD for the Linux kernel are still huge. I mean, FreeSync on Linux is still not exactly a thing. It is possible to do FreeSync. I've got it up and working with some patches, but it's not, again, for the uninitiated. It's coming. AMD's working real hard on it, but it's not here yet. And of course, NVIDIA is not dumping an insane amount of resources into Linux support, but they are dumping some support into Linux, which is appreciated.
And good luck getting G-Sync support on Linux.
Yeah.
That would probably defeat the purpose.
Probably can get FreeSync working on it before.
Oh, now that would be cool. So for those completely unaware, this works essentially by, like, previously the limitation with trying to emulate or compatibilize Windows games on Linux was the issue of DirectX, which is pretty much limited exclusively to Windows for the most part. And the way that this is adapting it is actually translating DirectX to the new open API of Vulkan, which basically only one game ever natively used that I know of, which was Doom. Which
there are a couple of hidden Vulkan shaders in more popular titles, but that's maybe a story for another time. But yeah, Vulkan is supposed to be a cross-platform API, kind of like Java.
Which the same issue happened with, as I joked, the original SteamOS and Steambox release. But they're putting this out there, and it looks like huge news. And I mean, it is. I mean, I was excited for it. There are big implications by this, but the limited games list alone kind of shows that this is almost like a call for help, so much as an announcement of a release. It is, hey, we have made this huge milestone, but we're not releasing a new product. And I guess that comes from an understanding that most of the current, like, full-time Linux crowd is already going to be tinkerers and anything. That's the stereotype, at least. They're not people coming expecting a push-button solution yet.
Yeah. I would say that the one big difference here is that the way that Valve has done the Proton thing has been to say, here, we got it working with these games, but here are all the tools that you need to continue DIYing things. Here's everything on GitHub. Total transparency, take it, run with it, do whatever. If you got a pull request, send the pull request. We will, do some interesting stuff with it. And so we've got a thread on the Level 1 forum where a bunch of our users are getting together and testing stuff, because you can enable Proton. You check the checkbox. Yes, I'm taking my life into my own hands. I'm willing to venture into uncharted territory. And you can use the Proton compatibility tool with other stuff on your system, other games and that sort of thing. And so there's a much longer, more exciting, perhaps, list of games on the Level 1 forums about that people are trying, and then it's like, hey, this is working for me. It works great. And everything may work. Maybe there's like one or two things that don't really work, because I see like Witcher 3 is on our list, and I've played Witcher 3 on Linux, and it's basically okay, but there's one or two monsters that have these weird graphical glitches, and you can still play it, but it's sort of an odd situation. So maybe that's why Witcher 3 wasn't on the list from Valve. They're working on that. But the really exciting thing, too, here is that at the same time that Valve did this, they also sent a thing to game developers and publishers that were on Steam. And one of the things, and I read it, and it was hilarious, but it's like, I'm a game developer on Steam, and my game is on there. Does this mean I'm going to have to support those filthy Linux communists? And the response was like, no, it's cool. We're handling this for you. Gosh, don't freak out, you guys. Now, I am paraphrasing just a bit.
Right.
But I thought that was sort of fun that Valve was sending that around to game developers.
I mean, I guess that's better than risking like some big publishers panicking or something, but
the Witcher 2 people were like, oh God, what's happening? Oh.
Not again.
Yeah.
There were a couple cool notes that they have improved multi-threaded support compared to normal Wine with their Proton build, and then that they're actually supporting more and more controllers, which is something that Steam itself has been doing. I actually ran into an issue, I think it was 2016, with the original PlayStation 4 wireless controller adapter. It did not work with any games at all, pretty much, except for PlayStation Remote Play. And then like 6 months later, Steam actually integrated the proper PlayStation controller drivers into Steam itself, which meant that pretty much any game could use it. And that is something combined with ideally adapting things to Vulkan that actually get me excited, because that's showing a more universal cross-platform future that things could be in. And while in their Q&A or the FAQ at the bottom, they said that they have no plans to support Mac right now, for me, the goal would be like, if you're going to go that degree of cross-platform universal, to at least have that in mind so that it would be an easy translation, because that's where things get excited for me, is if you can make things to where you compile or like you build it once, you can pretty much translate it to everything, then no one gets left out. And I realize like Linux has always been the short end of the stick with gaming and stuff, but to me, if you could just have a game and everybody play it on individual platforms, that is a better future for me than just, hey, we've adapted this to Linux with some hammers and nails.
I think that the commercial interests are always going to be working against the Linux folks to some extent. I mean, if we look at what Microsoft was planning to do with the games for Windows, I mean, talk about somebody that doesn't understand your market or understand like how literally anything works. Like the games for Windows thing is just, it was so terrible. I mean, even now,
rest in peace.
It's got like the built-in game recording thing. Like whenever you start the thing, it's like, oh, we got the Xbox utilities, we can do the game recording. You know, it's still on certain combinations of hardware. Just having that running in the background causes your performance to suffer.
Right.
It's not as bad as it used to be, admittedly. And, you know, there have been a lot of improvements from Microsoft on that. But talk about not understanding your market and how stuff is put together. I mean, it's just a lot of people are tired of that. And, you know, maybe there would be something for that on Linux. But, again, it sort of goes to can we make more money with this? And Linux puts control in the user's hands, and that is antithetical a lot of the time to commercial interests. I mean, there are games right now that Steam could enable support for that work fine, but that do not work simply because of DRM.
Right. Because
the facilities for DRM and spying on the user don't exist the same way that they do on Linux. And that is a serious problem for those game publishers, and so they don't want their stuff to be associated with Linux as a result of that, which perhaps is a bit short-sighted, and perhaps boycotting those types of publishers would not be unreasonable.
Right.
But I think that a lot of other companies are cautiously optimistic, but are perhaps a bit scared of past experiences, and a bit scared because it has been kind of a fringe platform that requires more support than a payoff historically. But I don't think that's really true anymore. I don't think that's actually been true for a while. It's just the paranoia is still there.
Right. And see, I would like to think that as the frameworks develop for this, we, aside from the super strict and almost spying DRM issue, which is a huge deal, and I realize some publishers just won't let go, and to a degree it's getting worse because every publisher wants their
Sony.
Yeah. And every publisher wants their own PC client now. You know, Uplay and Origin and Steam and Blizzard and whatever. But generally speaking, I would like to think that no longer would things need to be seen as separate platforms in the first place. Because like with the architecture change for game consoles going to x86, while you can't just directly run the game on PC, we've seen a lot more PC ports than we would have gotten, or we ever got in the previous generations. And there are some games like Nier, which is even on this compatibility list, that I honestly don't think we would have gotten on PC if not for that architecture change. And even if it's delayed, and even the ones that are launching, like Microsoft put out their Play Anywhere thing, which didn't seem to go very far with them, but they put out where they were going to launch games on PC, and then it was all in the Windows Store UWP versions. But a lot of those have started coming to Steam too. Like, it may not be 100% cross-platform at launch. You know, you may launch and it not support Linux, but maybe once, like, if it's just a matter of, like, small amounts of adjusting to at least get the basis working, we may still have a transition period where we have a bunch of terrible ports. We've dealt with that on Windows anyway. It would still be at least on par.
Terrible console ports.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it would at least be progress. And so I would like to be excited, even though I know initially, I mean, you have Ultimate Doom on this list. Like, do you really need dedicated compatibility layers to run Ultimate Doom when you could probably just software emulate that? And people have probably been doing that for 5 or 10 years already. Like,
good old games. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what good old games does.
Right.
A lot of this will be solved in hardware too. I mean, I'm a big fan of the hardware extensions for virtualization, and even just like, none of this is worth a headache. I'm just going to add a second graphics card to my system because it's worth it to me.
Right.
And run full fat Windows as a VM. And the performance penalty, if you set it up right, and it doesn't work perfectly on every set of hardware, but if you carefully choose your hardware and you carefully set it up, in terms of performance penalty, it's negligible.
Right.
I mean, it's essentially zero. It's close to zero. And I think that in the future, when it's easier to virtualize graphics card resources at the hardware level, I think that it will be even closer to what you're describing, because it is just x86 in a console at this point, in the PS4 or the Xbox One. It is just x86 here, there, and yonder. The architecture differences are just enough to be annoying, but if you're the game developer, you can do some stuff and get it translated without a lot of headache. And ultimately, what does it hurt if your game is available on more and more and more platforms?
Right.
That is what Microsoft promised with their UWP thing, because one of their demos was gaming on a Surface tablet, and I think the Surface tablet was streaming from like an Xbox or something.
Yeah.
Somebody was playing some real Twitch shooter on and I think people actually would be interested in that, but Microsoft failed to execute, and
multiple times
Nintendo did not. Yeah, and so a lot of people are like, oh, I could get into the Switch thing, the Breath of the Wild. I could play this on the morning commute.
Right.
I could do all this kind of stuff. Having this on Linux means that there's more opportunity for specialty hardware like that too, because you can do a lot of things outside the box on Linux that is a lot harder to do on Windows, and the licensing, and it's a little bit more locked down. And that's not universally true, but that's a little bit true. But one of the really interesting things about this Proton thing is that you could also run stuff in this emulation layer other than games. You can add other applications to it. Like Overwatch is a thing that you can run with Lutris. That's something that I demoed in one of my videos.
Right.
And it is mostly okay, but on some combinations of hardware, it hangs, software and hardware, it'll hang mysteriously. There's a couple threads about that on our forum that we're trying to help users with. And things like that still concern me, because I'm sure that Valve is on top of that for their game catalog.
Right.
But for the other platforms, I don't think that Blizzard is, even though now, like, Blizzard is so big that 2 or 3 people working on this wouldn't even be a blip on their human resources payroll.
Right.
And they don't seem to be doing it. So that is of some concern.
Yeah. I will say, just to redirect to your Gaming on Linux series and your Linus collab, your video about Looking Glass and things like that actually had me pretty interested in setting that up on my gaming rig, because the only reason it's running Windows is because it's just a dedicated gaming rig. The issue is I don't think my motherboard for my 8700K has 2x16 slots for a second graphics card. And so that was the only thing stopping me, and that was my only concern anyway. Like, my main rig, I can't even fit 2 graphics cards in because I use so many PCIe slots as is. But he has a really cool project where you can basically run, I'm going to butcher how I'm explaining this, but I'm going to do it anyway. You can basically run a virtualized version of Windows that uses its own dedicated hardware in your system, and then see it on the same computer, like the 2 gamers, 1 CPU Docker kind of thing, but combined into one more so. Yeah. And capture it pretty much without much performance benefit. And that is essentially what I always wanted to do in the inverse with Linux. Like, I spent so much time trying to figure out how to dedicate more hardware to my Linux virtual machines. And so if I just kind of flip that around, that's what we have. And so I am excited to eventually explore that once I have the PCIe bandwidth to do so, because 16 lanes on a chip.
But it turns out that is also a way that you can run FreeSync with using an NVIDIA graphics card as the render engine.
Ooh. That actually makes sense in a completely roundabout and irrelevant way, because that is how a lot of people use 60 hertz capture cards with their high refresh monitors, as they use the OBS preview, because it syncs it to a 60 hertz preview to output it. And so it's basically the same workaround. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Huh. You can render. It's like, I want to render at 150 FPS into this region of memory as opposed to the monitor. And so it'll just, it'll copy 150 frames per second into that region of the monitor. And then you can just have your AMD card cherry pick from that same region of memory, and ta-da! FreeSync with NVIDIA. Doing the thing on that soon, I hope. That might be another collab. I don't know. We'll see.
And before they adjust the driver to somehow block that or something.
Wouldn't be the first time. NVIDIA giveth, NVIDIA taketh away.
Yeah. Anyway, so where can people find you to actually learn more about things that I'm not going to be able to teach them anytime soon?
Probably the best place to start is forum.level1techs.com, because we've got a Linux channel and we've also got the Normie channel. And so,
Channel. I also discovered your like personal channel today that I don't think I realized existed, where you were like doing office vlogs and stuff. And I was like, this is like my favorite content from tech YouTubers. I didn't know this existed.
Yeah, I haven't done one of those in a while. I probably should do more. We do stuff like that. We do on Patreon as like a behind the scenes thing
right
now. And there is a behind the scenes thing with FreeSync on NVIDIA graphics cards on there, but it's just a very, very slight preview. It's literally like 2 minutes of, oh my god, I can't believe this works. It's
well, go check out Wendell for more stuff like that just slightly over my head sometimes, but I try to keep up.
NVIDIA gaming or NVIDIA Steam Linux gaming is like a really exciting, fun thing that's happening, and it's exciting that Valve is dumping bathtubs of cash into it.
Yeah.
I've called on them to do that. I was like, here NVIDIA or here Steam, this is where you should, or Valve, this is, these people, give them lots of money and just let them do their thing. And it turns out somebody was paying attention, and that is actually what's happening.
Glad to see Valve is putting money into something, because they have not released much of anything lately, and that's been sad. That's the story for another day, though. So thank you for being on. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun.
And links to all his stuff will be in the description below. Comment, like, subscribe, go check out Steam. Yeah. Bye.